AB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. It will be turning milder this weekend, but it's cold out there this morning. Potentially pretty icy as well, especially where we've had some snow. The culprit for that snow, this area of low pressure, has now cleared away. Weather fronts are trying to push in from the west, but for most places it's a dry, sunny start, but it is frosty out there. Now this weather front is providing dull and damp conditions in the southwest. Mostly rain here, but some snow over the moors. And as that wet weather creeps into parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, here too, a little bit of snow is likely during the day. Again, mostly over hills, however. For much of northern and eastern England and most of Scotland, it'll be a fine, bright day with sunny spells. But it is cold. Temperatures 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 perhaps in 1 or 2 spots. It is turning milder though in the southwest, and that is a sign of things to come. But the cold air still in place over northern England and Scotland. So as this wet weather comes in later today, parts of the Midlands too, we are going to see some snowfall. Not lasting too long, but it could cause some further disruptions spreading into Scotland through the night. Slippery conditions on the roads. So yes, the Met Office do have another warning in place. It won't be as cold tomorrow morning as it is this morning. Most places staying above freezing, but still cold enough for sleet and snow to be falling first thing across northern Scotland. For a good part of England and Wales, tomorrow's a dry and a bright day. Again, some sunshine around before things cloud over. Rain will push into Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it will mostly be rain at this stage, just some snow on the tops of the mountains, because it's turning milder by the end of the day, double digits almost across the board. The cold air still in place across northern Scotland, but elsewhere turning much, much milder. Could be into the teens by the end of Sunday. At the same time, another weather system comes in, bringing wet weather on Sunday night. But although it's turning milder this weekend, look at this. The blues and the cold air return next week.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News. Today we've got our exclusive interview with the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yes, in advance of the spring budget next week, we asked him if he's ashamed about the high level of taxation in this country. We asked him about corporation tax rising and what support he's going to be giving for energy bills and for people with the cost of living. We also talk about those lockdown leaks. Will he be found? We'll be reading about him in those WhatsApp messages with Matt Hancock. And as the longest-serving Secretary of State for Health, what did he think about the lockdown?
Join us in the studio to analyse all of the interview are two of the finest journalists in the country, Michael Crick and Patrick O'Flynn.
And of course, we want your views on what Jeremy Hunt had to say and what you would like to see in his budget next week. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
But first, here's the morning news with Ray.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Here's the latest.
The Chancellor has told GB News he wants Britain to have the most competitive business tax rates amid calls to scrap a planned hike in corporation tax. Ahead of Wednesday's spring budget, Jeremy Hunt spoke to Esther McVeigh and Phil Davis on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation. He said the corporation tax increase from 19 to 25% would still leave the UK with a lower rate than nearly all major rivals. But he said he was committed to previous promises of bringing down corporation tax.
What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
And you can see the full interview in the next few minutes exclusively with Esther and Phil here on GB News. Stay tuned. Now, Match of the Day will go ahead tonight, but without studio presenters or pundits after Gary Lineker was forced by the broadcaster to step back from the show. Football commentators, including Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, say they won't appear in solidarity with their co-star after the BBC ruled that a Twitter post by Lineker was a breach of its guidelines. The former player had criticised the government's new asylum policy, likening the language used to that of 1930s Germany. The BBC said he won't be returning until an agreement has been reached on his social media usage. Akil Ahmed is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC. He told us it's complicated.
He has a number of employers, and so can the BBC really impose its particular perspective on social media policy on somebody who is a freelancer? If he was a full-time member of staff at the BBC, I think there would be a completely different conversation. This is not me dismissing it and saying it's a storm in a teacup. This is me saying it's complicated because of the nature of his contract and the fact that he's not actually a news and current affairs presenter.
Junior doctors say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary failed to attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned three-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association voted to take industrial action. They're demanding a 35% pay rise and warn future strikes could last longer than 72 hours. Staying with health, and NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards over the last year. The patients stay in their own homes whilst receiving treatment and have their vital signs monitored remotely. Medical bosses say the scheme has been a real game changer, helping patients to avoid unnecessary hospital trips and enabling them to be discharged sooner. Silicon Valley Bank UK says it will be put into insolvency from Sunday evening. It comes after its parent company in America was put under US government control, becoming the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crisis. The Bank of England says it will stop SVB from making payments or accepting deposits. However, customers can be paid up to £85,000 from the deposit insurance scheme. And Tom Hanks has been named Worst Supporting Actor at the 2023 Razzie Awards. A warning for those watching on television, the following footage does contain flashing images. Now, the Oscar-winning actor was chosen for his depiction of Colonel Tom Parker in the movie Elvis. His portrayal of Presley's former manager was described by judges as cruel, and they also slammed his latex face. The awards honour poor performances in Hollywood movies and are held a day before the Oscars on Sunday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. So let's get straight back to Esther and Phil. Thanks, Ray. Loved the alternative Oscars there, did you?
That film was brilliant. I thought Tom Hanks was fantastic in it.
Well, you obviously weren't one of the judges last night. Anyway, joining us in the studio throughout the show today is the broadcaster and journalist Michael Crick, as well as the columnist Patrick O'Flynn. Good morning to you both. We shall look forward to your analysis as the show goes on.
Yes, ahead of the Chancellor's spring budget on Wednesday, me and Phil had an exclusive chat with Jeremy Hunt, where he laid down his plans to tackle inflation, reduce government borrowing and grow the UK economy. Let's see what the Chancellor had to say. Well, Chancellor, thank you for seeing us today. A busy week ahead of you. I know you won't be able to reveal anything that's in the budget, but if you do, we're happy that you do that. But we'd like to explore your thoughts into what's going to happen, the decisions you're going to be making. Now, we know that you became Chancellor at a very difficult time, and government's borrowings were tens of billions of pounds. So what I'm just wondering, when, you know, what's going to shape a decision, do you think government is borrowing tens of billions of pounds because it's overspending or because it's undertaxing?
Well, it's actually a combination of a number of things, but the main reason is because we're not growing. And we need to be growing as an economy. And when your growth slows down, your tax receipts come down. That creates enormous pressure if you want to carry on spending the same amounts that you've been spending previously on things like the NHS. And what I had to do when I arrived in November was stabilise the ship. We had a very worrying situation as far as the markets were concerned. Businesses were worried about whether they could invest for the future. And we have a very big inflation problem, and people needed to see that we had a path to sound money and lower inflation. So that was the job in November. If we want to keep taxes down, as I do very strongly, then we now need to have a path to growth. Not just growth that's bouncing back from a recession, but proper, sustainable, long-term healthy growth.
Well, then that's good. So Liz Truss was right then. Growth is where we need to go. So then people would question the taxation level and the taxation level of a Conservative government, which would be impeding growth there. So as a Chancellor, are you embarrassed, ashamed that you're here now and we've got the highest levels of taxation in modern history?
It's not what I want at all. But, by the way, Liz Truss was right to say that the central question is how we deliver growth. Where I think the mini-budget was wrong was to say you can borrow to cut taxes, because that's not sustainable. That's not money that you've actually got. That's money you're borrowing. And so if we're going to cut taxes permanently, then it needs to be a tax cut that we earn through higher growth. And the first step is stability. And for stability, you need responsible public finances. And that's why we took some very difficult decisions. We did increase taxes. We actually cut spending by more than we increased taxes in the autumn statement. So it was a very, very difficult statement. What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
Well, I can hear a huge sigh of relief across the country as you say that, and living within your means, not spending what you haven't got. And that's why I said, are we overspending or undertaxing? I know, Phil, you're interested in that.
No, I am. I mean, the Treasury is often criticised for being too orthodox in its forecast, in the sense that it believes that if you put taxes up, it will raise more money. If you cut taxes, it will cost money. Do you accept a more dynamic taxation model and accept that if you cut the rate of tax, you can actually gain more tax revenue from it, something that the Treasury have been accused of not believing in?
I do think there are dynamic effects, yes, when you do things like cut taxes. We have to make sure that those commitments are credible, and that means making sure that independent bodies like the Office for Budget Responsibility also accept there's a dynamic effect. And they too have been having lots of discussions with me over the last couple of months as I've been preparing this budget as to what those dynamic effects are. But yes, what we're trying to do is to increase the productive capacity of the economy, and a highly taxed, highly regulated economy has less productive capacity. It means that investment by the private sector is crowded out by the higher taxes that are taken by the public sector. But unfortunately, this is the disappointing news I know for many people, we aren't going to be able to get there in one bound. This is a journey. If I think about what George Osborne did in 2010 when he raised the personal tax threshold, that process started in 2010. In 2022, 12 years later, Rishi Sunak announced as Chancellor a budget that meant for the first time in our history, every person in this country can earn £1,000 a month without paying tax or national insurance. That is a really big step forward in terms of a reduction in the tax burden, but we got there over time.
So there we go, that was the first part. We've got Michael Crick and Patrick O'Flynn with us. Michael, what did you make of what Jeremy Hunt was saying there about growth? Liz Truss was right, he said during the course of that, and about taxes.
Well, he's sticking to the aims of his own budget last autumn. Growth, not cutting taxes, cutting the debt, cutting inflation. And I think he's a naturally cautious person, I think, and he will try and stick to that in this budget. He doesn't want to do anything to frighten people. He doesn't want to do anything that makes people think you're going back to the Kwasi-Kwarteng budget of last autumn. And it's interesting what he says about taxes and business taxes. I think we're going to have to wait for personal taxes to come down. I think the rise in corporation tax is going to go ahead, but I think it's quite clear that we're going to get there are going to be sort of tax cuts in what happens to capital allowances and things like that, so that to encourage investment.
Michael said the word cautious. Would you say overly cautious? I mean, people are giving comparisons of an absolute pendulum swing. Surely there's somewhere in the middle. What did you think, Patrick?
Well, I think, first of all, congratulations on an amazing scoop. Getting a long-form interview with the Chancellor of Exchequer on the weekend before the budget isn't something I can remember happening very much recently.
You'll see at the end of the interview, he had to run off, and we were trying to keep him as long as possible,
Right.
but he had to actually go to the Cabinet meeting.
Yes,
they're not supposed to do this, are they, Patrick? Chancellors to do an interview.
Well, that's for the Chancellor, but it's for journalists to invite him and see if they can get the scoop. So congratulations on that. I think overall, he's sort of saying he feels the pain and understands the perspective of what Philip described as dynamic tax cuts, and he didn't rule it out, but nonetheless he in turn sort of cited George Osborne, who was very much so-called, what he called fiscal conservative. He cited the OBR, and he seems like he's trying to persuade the OBR of some of these dynamic effects. But I got more sort of steady as she go vibes. And he specifically said, didn't he, that he doesn't believe in preemptive tax cuts, that you have to earn the tax cut. Well, if you believe in the dynamic effect of tax cuts, then I don't quite see how that flows. But I agree with Michael that he seems to be warming up towards the idea of specific targeted corporation tax reliefs rather than having everyone fixate on the headline figure, which obviously is scheduled to go up a very large amount, possibly, a stupidly large amount, given some of the more competitive corporation tax rates that are out there.
I think, Michael, that what struck me about what he said was that he said that getting taxes down is a journey.
Yeah.
And you can't get them all in one go. Now, I always thought that when you're on a journey, you at least would start off in the right direction. And so you'd sort of, what I took a journey to sort of tax cuts would be that you'd start with a few tax cuts and you'd end up at your final destination. It seems that his journey is taking him in the wrong direction to start with to get lower taxes.
I'm sure there'll be one or two things in the budget that at least take you to the end of the street on your long journey to the other side of the country. But, I mean, remember, he's going to have, 3 more budgets, really. He's got this autumn and then 2 next year, if, as I think, the election will be right at the end of next year. But he's got 2 or 3 more budgets to start doing that. But, I mean, the analogy you might make is with Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher didn't really start cutting taxes in a big way till right towards the end of her government. She sorted out the economy first. Inflation first, of course, and then bringing down government debt. And it was only in year 8 that up until year 8 of the Thatcher government, there was a 60% tax rate on richer people in this country. It's hard to remember that, but it's true. And he could have used that as the mantra, but Jeremy Hunt will be cutting personal taxes before long, assuming the Conservatives remain in office.
So whilst you rightly say there will be more budgets, before the general election, I personally think this is a very important one, could be the most important one, because people will have made up their mind what they're doing. They want to see change along the way. So is it going to therefore be too little too late when he does do things?
No, I don't think so. It depends when he does them, doesn't it? I mean, if he does them next autumn or even next spring, that's still, time for that to sink in and time for that to reach people's pockets. But I do think, people's main worry right now is inflation. And their other big worry right now, which we haven't mentioned, is the fact that for lots of people in this country, their wages have come down. And I think, one of the things that Hunt needs to start thinking about is how is he going to pay for these pay settlements, which are inevitable before long. I mean, we saw on the news the junior doctors' strike. These are people who have had, vast numbers of people in the public sector and the private sector too, have had real terms pay cuts in the long term. And there are disputes at the moment as to how much money the Chancellor's got to play with. I was going to say, what is that headroom? And you're saying he's keeping the headroom there for maybe public sector wage increases? Well, I think he's going to have to bear in mind wage increases that are coming, not necessarily increases in real terms, by the way. They'd probably be below inflation, but they'll be more than the government's offering now. The National Institute for Economic and Social Research this week was saying they reckon he's got 100 billion to play with. Whereas the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, say it's only 9 billion. There's a big difference there. I mean, so goodness knows what's going to happen, really.
Well, Michael's right, isn't he? People are worried about the cost of living. Their wages aren't keeping up with that cost of living, which seems the obvious thing to do for a Chancellor is to cut people's taxes, and yet he seems reluctant to help them with that particular problem.
Yeah, I think a bit of a political economic cycle going on. So there's a little bit of war chest building happening. And I think Rishi Sunak in particular has correctly surmised that people expect it to be rough for some little while ahead, but wants to be able to look at the nation in a year's time and say, look, we've done a lot to dig ourselves out of this hole. We've been grown up. It's been steady progress. But now we are in a position to responsibly cut your taxes just in time for a general election.
Does that work? Does fattening the pig on market day actually work anymore? Or are people much more cynical about it now and can see through things like that?
Well, it's certainly true. There's a very high level of cynicism about politics at the moment, no doubt at all.
Not least from you two.
Well, of course. But doing it...
not surprising, is it?
As you say, doing it on market day, i.e. Under Michael's timetable, an autumn financial statement 6 weeks before a general election, that would be too late. But I do see, next year's spring budget as being the time when Hunt and Sunak can say, look, we've made quite a bit of progress. We told you it would be a tough journey, but now we can make some tax cuts. And I actually think Sunak has played the industrial relations thing quite well. He hasn't made it too high octane. He hasn't made early concessions either. And it is true that as a dispute goes on, for the unions, getting the workers to strike again and again and again becomes more difficult. As inflation comes down, I think we have what they call a landing zone looming.
Patrick O'Flynn will be staying with us, Michael Crick will be staying with us, but coming up, we have the second part of our interview with Jeremy Hunt, and we also want to hear from you what you thought about it and what you'd like to see in the budget too. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion. People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. What a day, what a show, what an exclusive interview. We've got some of your views here. Alistair says Mr Hunt needs to raise the tax payment thresholds for people. This would reduce the need for supplementary support payments. It's the fairest way to gain the same amount of tax.
Lynn is also interested in tax thresholds. She said, I'd like to know if the tax threshold will go up. The only growth I see is in illegal immigration and legal immigration. It's costing our country a fortune. She's quite cynical of politicians as well, I think.
Yes, and he goes, Chris says, I will believe that Jeremy Hunt is serious about the economy when he begins to tackle the massive, unwieldy public sector. Start with MOD, NHS procurement.
Keep those views coming in. We want to know what you think the Chancellor should do in his budget next week. But now, in the second part of our interview, we start by asking Jeremy Hunt if economic forecasters have too much influence over his budget decisions. Yeah. On the Office of Budget Responsibility, there is a concern that they, who are also accused of not having the most dynamic tax model either, that they're in effect the de facto Chancellor, that everything that you do is done to satisfy the Office of Budget Responsibility and their forecasts, rather than doing what you actually genuinely think is the best thing for the country and the best thing for the economy. What would you say to people who are concerned that there's too much focus on what the Office of Budget Responsibility say, whose forecasts, by the way, are lamentable in their accuracy?
Well, their forecasts, in fairness, are about the average amongst forecasters in a period in which no forecasters has done particularly well, because we've had pandemics and Ukraine and, energy price shocks. So it's been a difficult period for everyone. I think we need to remember as Conservatives that we set up the Office for Budget Responsibility in 2010. The reason we did it was because we were worried that chancellors were fiddling their own forecasts. They were standing up at budgets saying, I can afford to do this, that. Mainly we were worried about what Gordon Brown did as Chancellor. And we wanted to stop chancellors finding lots of extra money to spend and putting up taxes more by magically changing their Treasury forecasts. What I would say is that the markets were very clear. Whatever anyone else may think, the markets were very clear. They do trust the OBR. And when the previous Chancellor tried to do a budget without having the OBR looking through the numbers, the markets said that was not acceptable. And as you and I know, someone very close to both of our hearts said you can't buck the markets. And I think we have to accept the markets want someone independent to look over the Chancellor's maths. And in the end, what the OBR, all they're doing is confirming whether or not we meet the fiscal rules that I have chosen as Chancellor. That's all we're asking them to do. We choose those rules, and they then say whether in their judgment we're meeting them.
Now, I want to go back to corporation tax, because there's a lot going on in that space at the moment, particularly the horrifying thought for some of us that it's going to go from 19 to 25%. And I know that you, in your leadership bid, wanted to bring corporation tax down to 15%. So I'm not computing the 25% when you wanted it to be at 15%. And we've heard how people aren't going to invest in the country. We heard AstraZeneca say this, and that was my part of the world, Cheshire. I'm going to say to you, we shouldn't be increasing that. And you're a man who wanted 15%. What's gone wrong? Were you wrong then? Are you wrong now?
Well, I think I was right in what I wanted to do then, and I think what you wanted to do then at that time, Esther, which
I still want to do it.
Yes, which is for Britain to have the most competitive business tax levels of anywhere. So that is fundamentally extremely important, because the Conservative insight is that, you need to grow the economy if you're going to have money to spend on all the things we care about and keep taxes low. And we are fundamentally the party of the economy. I think that if I was going, I'm not going to have another leadership campaign, but let me put it this way, I'll be careful of my words
never
here.
Again? You might do.
No, never again. But if I was going to have my time again, the argument I would have made is that we need to have the lowest effective corporation taxes, because the headline rate, which, by the way, even at 25%, is lower than nearly all our major rivals, France, Germany, and so on. But what actually matters, because a lot of companies are allowed to count their capital expenditure against their corporation tax bill. Now, one of the ways that George Osborne reduced corporation tax headline rates was that he got rid of those capital allowances. But for manufacturing industry, such as AstraZeneca in your part of the world, those capital allowances work. So I would say we do want to bring down our effective corporation tax, the total amount people pay as corporation tax as a proportion of their profits. We do want to bring those down. But as I said before, it's not something we're going to be able to do all in one go.
There you go, that was part two. Michael, it's difficult being a politician, isn't it? You stand for a leadership election on a promise to cut corporation tax from 19% to 15%, and then lo and behold find yourself in a situation where you're having to defend increasing it from 19% to 25%. Did he manage to pull that off successfully, do you think?
I think he did, actually. I mean, of course, the other problem he has is that he's been arguing for years that much more money needs to be spent on the health service, and where are we going to see it from the Chancellor? But on the corporation tax thing, I think it's a pretty strong hint there that there are going to be concessions on the allowances and the reliefs, as we were discussing earlier. I mean, another suggestion that's been made is that he might sort of say, OK, well, this is the programme that I want to bring down the headline rate, to 15% or something, by this particular date, 2026 or 2020 or something like that. That would be another way, I think, of reassuring people. Because after all, investments are a long-term thing. So the profit that you make from your investment now may not come until 26, 27. And if people can think, well, the Chancellor's committed to bringing it down to a much lower rate by that date, that in itself, that commitment, and if we believe Hunt, and I think he is a credible person, the only thing is, will he be in power for much longer? Then that would help.
What do you mean, will he be in power for much longer? You mean as Chancellor?
No, well, I mean, or will Labour be in power?
Oh, OK. Yeah. I thought, was he losing his job the way you said that when you said he would still be there?
He may only be Chancellor for a couple of years, and therefore, if he was to make a commitment like that, would Labour take it on? But yeah, I think he did wriggle out of that quite well. But I think you're finding it is easier to be a journalist than to be a politician, aren't you?
Patrick, Philip pressed him on the OBR and these forecasters. I still seem to think he seems to be in a stranglehold, in the grip of those forecasters. He seemed to be defending them then, even though he admitted that they were wrong in their forecasts.
Well, the truth about economic forecasting, certainly beyond a few months out, is as a science, it's about at the stage 18th century medicine was that. So I don't know if you remember watching that film, The Madness of King George, and all the physicians were gathered round him and recommending leeches, and they really hadn't got much of a clue. And economic forecasting is rather like that. There are so many imponderables and variables. So to my mind, it does make it strange that so much import is placed upon things like the OBR predicting what growth will be in 2 years' time. I mean, it really is put your finger in to the wind stuff. But he was on strong ground when he basically said you can't buck the markets, i.e. the markets aren't some sinister thing. They are people in charge of their own money, or who have appointed other people in charge of their money, working out how much they're prepared to lend to the government and at what rate. And, clearly Truss and Kwarteng lost confidence. And, if the British government needs to borrow, which it will do, it has to have confidence. And for sensible reasons or silly ones, the OBR is
they've lost the bottle
there.
since the mini-budget? On the sort of tax.
No.
I mean, I'm looking at a set of a chart here.
Yeah.
It's what Jeremy Corbyn would have done and what the Tories are doing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about raise corporation taxes, Corbyn tick, Tories tick. Extra tax on high earners, Corbyn tick, Tories tick. Windfall tax on companies, Corbyn tick, Tories tick. Raid on dividends, Corbyn tick, Tories tick. What's going on?
John McDonnell, Corbyn's shadow chancellor, loves all that. His policies have come in from another government.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from Jeremy Hunt's point of view, he didn't win the leadership by a long way. He's been Sunak'd, and basically he's now talking about effective corporation taxes.
Yes, I like that word, very political.
And it's not a nonsense economically to talk about the effective tax rate. And he was giving a very strong hint there, wasn't he, about directing specific tax breaks to try and encourage investment, to boost productivity, to get growth. That's the challenge.
And the other thing here, of course, is the thing about these high taxes is it's not just a matter of whether they raise revenue or not, and the questions that you were raising, Phil, about whether, in fact, you raise more money by bringing the tax down, but they're symbolic. And the problem with that budget was it didn't just annoy the markets. It was also, I think it annoyed a lot of the country because it looked like your party was bringing down taxes on the rich and all its friends in business. And that is another reason why.
It wasn't costed was the main thing, and they didn't cut spending was the main thing.
The symbolism of it plays an important role here, particularly when we're less than 2 years away from an election. And of course, he said he wasn't going to fight another campaign, didn't he? Another leadership campaign. Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah,
never write people off in politics.
I did double ask the question just in case. Michael Crick, you're staying with us.
If he could get away with his changing corporation tax, I'm sure he can get away with.
So you're both staying with us now. Coming up in the next part of the interview with Jeremy Hunt, we asked if the UK has lost its competitive edge with the rest of the world with the taxes at such a high level, and what support he'll be giving for energy bills and for the cost of living to the public. So don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Hello and welcome back. It's now 10:36. Loads of your views coming in, particularly what you'd like to see in the budget.
Alan's my kind of Chancellor. He says he wants a rise in personal allowances, a freeze or cut in corporation tax, scrapping the green levy and VAT on energy, cutting fuel duty and VAT on fuel, review of business rates and cutting public spending. Well done, Alan.
And Michael says Jeremy Hunter's got to scrap the rise in corporation tax at the least. That will give businesses a chance to be competitive in world markets. So glad to have your views. Keep them coming in. Of course, we've got Michael Crick here, we've got Patrick O'Flynn here, but we're back to that exclusive
Alison
interview.
says Esther for PM.
Nice one, Alison. Anyway, back to our interview with the Chancellor, when we asked, can the UK be a competitive force with such high taxation levels, and how does he propose to support businesses? See, we listened to what you had to say, GB viewers. Put it this way: the corporate tax rate, because you're saying, oh, it's good. It's basically saying it's good compared around the world. Well, I'll say that, the rise in corporation tax and the end of the super deduction for plant and machinery means that the UK drops like a stone from having the 10th most competitive rate in the developed world to the 33rd. Competitive rate, and that's due to the UK-based, US-based tax foundation. So are you happy as a Chancellor to preside over that falling in competitive rates?
I want our tax rates to be the most competitive. I stick to that. It's what I said in the summer. It's what I believe now. As I say, we can't get there all in one go, and stability also matters. A responsible approach to public finances also matters for businesses up and down the country, because without that, you can't have a path to lower inflation. They worry about whether it's possible to invest in the UK. So I need to have a balanced approach to doing this. But if you're saying to me, is it my ambition for us to have the most competitive business tax rates? Do I want to make progress? Yes, I do.
My timing is next week.
But you said you wanted growth. Growth was really important. The Centre for Policy Studies and the Tax Foundation say that the corporation tax increase alone will reduce GDP long-term by 1.2%. And the Bank of England predicts a fall in business investment of 5.5% next year. So that's hardly going for growth, is it? That's doing the exact opposite. That's going for a slower growth.
Well, that is why you and I are both Conservatives, Phil, because we believe in bringing tax rates down. But all I would say is you have to do so in a framework that is responsible for public finances. If you don't, we actually have, unfortunately, a case study of what happens if you don't do that, because that's exactly what happened in the mini-budget, where taxes were reduced in a way that, pleased all Conservatives. We were happy to see taxes coming down, but it wasn't in the context that we were able to defend as being responsible with public finances. And the result was that we paid a very, very heavy price as a party, but also for businesses up and down the country, where they suddenly said, what's going on and what's happening in the markets and what's happening to interest rates. So it has to be done in a responsible way.
There's lots of concern in the country, as I'm sure you're aware, about energy prices, about fuel prices, and the fact that the end of the energy price guarantee is on the cards, that there could be a hike in fuel duty. There's been speculation in the media that you may actually do something to continue the energy price guarantee, that you may actually scrap the increase in fuel duty. Can you share with us what your current thinking is on those two issues? Because people are, and businesses are, very concerned about both of those.
If I was going to spill the beans on the budget, Phil, it would be to you. But unfortunately,
not me.
and to you, Esther, both to the dynamic duo. But I'm not actually going to do that. But let me make one point about energy prices, though. What we need is a pathway to permanently low energy prices, where businesses can depend, whatever someone like Putin does in another part of the world, they can depend on stable, clean, green energy. And the key to that is nuclear, because we've now got up to 40% of our energy coming from renewables, including things like wind, which is great. But you can't get to 100%, because there are times when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, even in Britain and even in Yorkshire. And so because of that, you need to have nuclear power. Now, that is a 2-decade-long process. We're aiming for about 25% of our electricity to be generated by nuclear by 2050. It's the right step. I announced in the autumn statement, despite the spending cuts I was announcing, that we would be spending £900 million on Sizewell C going forward. We need to continue with that. That's the long-term answer to businesses worried about energy costs and to families worried about these wild gyrations in their bills.
Now, again, I'm going to go back to how I could help you reduce taxes as quickly as possible and not put the corporation tax. And that's to save you some money, because we can't overspend as Conservative governments. We've got to make sure we don't spend what we haven't got. And one of them has to be by getting rid of that white elephant, which is High Speed 2, which started off at costing 37 billion, now northwards of 150 people. People are working from home, people are doing Zoomed online. HS2 seems something that the South seems to think that the North wants, and really the North would sooner have the connection across the North, that sort of, you know, the powerhouse of the North, and we need that train line there. But really HS2 has sucked money out of that. When are you going to stop HS2, save some money, get things right for the North and bring down our taxes?
Well, Esther, I think you and I can agree on many, many things. That is going to be one thing that we never agree on. But one thing I'll tell you why, but one thing I do completely agree with you is the importance of connectivity in the North. But
we're losing it because you're pursuing High Speed 2. We're losing our connectivity.
I don't think it's an either or. I think you can do Northern Powerhouse Rail and make that an exciting project. Let me tell you, though, the core answer as to why it is. If our second cities in the UK were as rich relatively as second cities in countries like Germany, France or Japan, our GDP would be 5% higher, and we would have much more social cohesion. We have a historic problem in this country that wealth and growth and highly paid jobs have been over-concentrated in London and the South East.
Is there a price, though, at which HS2, even you would say, we can't, it's now no longer value for money? Are you determined to build it irrespective of how much the price goes up to?
We have to do it at a reasonable price. But can I just finish my point, Phil? Because it is really important. If you say, why is it that wealth and opportunity are better spread in Japan or Germany than they are in the UK, one of the reasons is because you can go from Osaka to Tokyo for a meeting and back in a day, and you don't have to move to Tokyo to get a well-paid job. You can grow your business in Osaka, and that connectivity is really important way.
We agree with the connectivity. We're saying we need them up the northern towns. We can get to London fast enough. We don't need the drain to London. We want to get across the north.
There you go. That was a big area of disagreement, wasn't it? HS2.
And obviously, we've seen this week what's happening with HS2. We're not stopping it, we're just slowing it down, and it's going to be less effective because it is costing so much money. Anyway, Michael, what did you think?
Well, I think he's right on HS2, although I think you're right on HS2 across the north.
HS3, as they, whatever they call it now, Powerhouse or whatever.
Powerhouse Rail. The numbers, but
and the names that they've called them.
I mean, the reason, the cost of HS2 isn't on 1 year. It's over. Well, it's about 30 years now, The important thing is that unless you build HS2, you are going to have to renovate the West Coast Main Line, which I travel up and down all the time, as indeed I imagine you do, and that's going to take 10 years of disruption, and will drive people off the railways onto the motorways. It'll be very ungreen. So you do need HS2. It is terribly unfortunate the costs keep going up, but not surprising perhaps. And I think it's probably a mistake actually to have this pause, because it'll probably end up costing even more because of the pause, and the expertise will go off and do other jobs.
Let me ask you the same question I asked Jeremy Hunt. You would build HS2 irrespective of what price it reached. There wouldn't be a point at which you said, well, do you know what? Maybe at that price it was reasonable, but this price is ludicrous.
When it's sucking all the money from every other transport scheme.
Irrespective of how much it ended up costing, you'd still plough on.
Well, the counterpoint is, so you'd abandon it halfway through, would you?
Oh, I would have abandoned it a long time ago.
Because it's 40% built to Birmingham, isn't it? Yeah. It's a tricky one, and whenever you do an engineering project like that. But we're way behind with high-speed rail links in this country compared with Western Europe, and we are suffering.
But like I say, people now aren't doing the intercity. People are now going online. Sort of technology has surpassed what that train line was, Patrick.
Well, I think there, Esther, you had him on the ropes, and it's sophistry when he says it's not an either-or, because in the current fiscal position, it kind of is. And, you know, again, economists have this concept, opportunity cost, and if you have all your railway investment expertise and manpower and capacity going for HS2, then obviously your linking of the great northern cities is going to be behind it in the queue. So there's a priority there, and as you rightly said, the business case for HS2 must be way weaker than it was, because we thought we were dealing with an economy where not many people work from home. We thought we were dealing with a £37 billion scheme, and now we're dealing with, you know, a £150 billion scheme, and the way we work being completely different. And as you say, the north-south routes, I take Michael's point that he wants to be able to get to Manchester United games from London long time in the future. But
after last week, you probably don't want to get there.
Yeah, so of course we want good routes from the north to the capital, but it's a matter of priorities.
I think that's why he took the opposite side on this argument to me. We shouldn't be sat so close after that football game.
Oh, I've forgotten about that. No, we shouldn't.
No one else has.
I won't say 7-0.
On the other side of this, though, I mean, although I am a great HS2 fan, this whole question about whether it helps the north or not, I think is tricky, because, you know, I'm from Manchester, and, you know, Manchester has seen an enormous...
So you're a rare Manchester United supporter being from Manchester, aren't you, Michael?
Well, indeed, although, strictly speaking, I was born in Northampton. But I regard myself as a Mancunian. I went to school there. And you've seen a huge brain drain from not just Manchester, the whole of the north, over the last 50 or 60 years. And the danger is, of course, that if HS2 is even quicker than the 2 hours, 5 minutes that it is now, you know, you'll get people commuting even more than they do now.
The brain
they come down to London.
So this is why the connection of the north was far more imperative for that power engine of the north.
What's the benefit of the north? You'd have thought they'd have started in the north, wouldn't you, rather than started in London?
I think there were planning reasons with the fair. But it goes through your seat, doesn't it, Esther?
Oh, yes, with absolutely no benefit whatsoever. No, to be fair, it doesn't help, really, the north at all. And if you see what's going to happen now that you've got the slow train to the different sort of areas, so you'll get off at Crewe and get on the slow train back to Liverpool, and how it works. For many reasons it doesn't work. But I want to get back to his words, because I think the word of the interview kept talking about responsible, a pathway to permanency, a journey, which to me it was just all too slow when we're working in a period where I think we need to galvanise the economy and where we're doing to get over the pandemic, Patrick.
Yeah, I think it's if I can use the word, a corrective to the quasi-Kwarteng Liz Truss period, isn't it? And he is still obsessed, I would say, with sending out signals to, you know, big business, major investors, global economic think tanks that the orthodoxy is back.
And it seems to me something's going to have to take a hit, whether that's booze, cigarettes, fuel duty, whatever it is, because he's also talking about benefits for childcare, you know, what they're going to do to get people back into work, you know, and that's going to be more benefits and support and training.
He's got more money, though, because actually inflation means you raise more money, say, from VAT.
Money, Michael. We've just got, you know, we were expected to have even less. It's not that we've got money, we haven't got money.
The revenues will have gone up because of, I mean, you know, paradoxically.
We're still borrowing huge amounts of money every year.
Still borrowing huge amounts.
You mean you've got a bit of headway because we're not paying as much on the energy. We've got some more back on intake, so GDP go up this month.
VAT revenues as well. But I mean, we've spoken so much about taxes, but there are other things that it looks like he's going to do. For instance, I mean, of course, and one of the other great problems about growth is there isn't enough labour in all sorts of
well, we'll be coming back to that because we've got another section of the Jeremy Hunt interview, and you're both staying with us. But following up on the Anglo-French summit, the UK is set to help fund a detention centre on French soil in an attempt to try to stop the flow of migrants crossing into the UK via the Channel.
The deal was agreed in Paris yesterday between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and President Emmanuel Macron at a summit to tackle the issue.
Joining us now to discuss this is the journalist David Chetzan. Good morning, David. Well, I don't know what you thought to it, but it seemed a heck of a lot of money for not too much.
Well, it does seem like a heck of a lot of money, doesn't it? It's a big chunk of change, nearly £500 million, spread over several years. And there was a bit of a sense of déjà vu, because that last agreement between Britain and France back in November also involved paying tens of millions of pounds for the French to put more police on patrol to try to do more to stop the small boats crossing the channel. So, in a sense, this is just an extension of that. Plus, as you were saying, the detention centre. Now, that is something that's completely new. Could it act as a major deterrent? Well, I think it might, because if migrants are rounded up in northern France, put into a detention centre, and then deported either back to the first European country they entered or to their home country, if their home country's judged safe, I think it could put a lot of people off. And of course, Rishi Sunak's argument on the money is, we're spending £5.5 million a day on putting migrants in hotels in the UK. This will help us reduce that bill. So over time, this could be the bottom line could work out quite well.
David, because I was trying to read up a little bit on this detention centre that they'd be doing, I think it's in Dunkirk, and I was looking at, well, what's the size? What's the capacity? How many people would be there? What sort of a deterrent are we talking about? They said the capacity was 140 people.
That is so far, yes. But I mean, as I understand it, the plan is to extend that. And the plan is not to keep people for months in the detention centre, but to process them rapidly and deport them, basically, if they are found to be in an irregular situation in France. So, yes, I mean, there are holes in this plan, just as there are holes in the Rwanda plan. I mean, Britain's paid $120 million to Rwanda to take migrants. So far, no migrants have been sent there, and Rwanda said that it could only take a few hundred. So, yeah, I mean, we'll have to just see how this works out in practice. You're quite right. It's a little bit vague so far, and it may be a question of applying a sticking plaster to a broken leg.
David, can I be cheeky and ask you?
It's not like you.
No, I know it's not. But you used to be a BBC man. I just wondered what you made of the Gary Lineker situation, and whether or not you think the BBC were right to insist on their impartiality rules being implemented in his case, or whether they've overreacted. I'd love to know what you thought about that.
Well, I'm not sure my personal opinion is valuable, but I mean, I think the BBC does have a problem now because it's dealing with an unprecedented revolt. I mean, Match of the Day is going to go out now without pundits, without presenters. And I mean, I can tell you, among the rank and file at the BBC, there is a lot of discontent, and a lot of people are saying, well, Andrew Neil, who used to be a politics presenter on the BBC, was also the chairman of The Spectator, which, as you know, is a right-wing magazine, and used to tweet a lot of stuff that reflected his own right of centre, shall we say, political opinions. He was never pulled up on it. And as far as I could tell, whenever he was presenting or interviewing politicians on the BBC, he always adhered very strictly to the BBC's impartiality rules. So there didn't seem to be a problem. Somehow there is now a problem with Gary Lineker, even though he never touches politics on the BBC. And a lot of BBC journalists are also asking, well, what about the chairman of the BBC, who was found to have failed to declare the fact that he was somehow involved in introducing Boris Johnson to somebody who then gave him a loan of £800 million, who is known to be a Conservative supporter. And then there's the Director General as well, who's a former Conservative candidate, but no questions were ever raised about that. So I think the BBC is going to have to review this very, very carefully.
And we'll be talking about that later, because I was surprised that really the BBC it has to be impartial, but they didn't seem to have a plan in place for people who were or weren't, what they could do. I don't know, warnings and what would happen if you did breach those. But going on back to the deal that the UK got yesterday with Macron, Macron is still saying that he won't be taking any of those people back who've crossed over on boats. And I'm just wondering, what have we got for our £500 million? We've got this detention centre capacity, 140 people, but he's not going to be taking any of those migrants back in boats.
OK, you've also got hundreds more police on patrol on the beaches of northern France. Now, I don't think the French have ever claimed that they could stop every boat from putting out to sea, because you're talking about more than 200 miles of coastline. Now, Macron's view on the returns deal is that this has to be concluded and negotiated with the EU as a whole, not bilaterally with France. And, you know, what Macron's aides have been telling me is they find it rather ironic that Britain did have a returns deal, but then when it left the EU, that deal was ended. And so essentially what Britain's asking for is a return to the deal it had before Brexit. It's because of Brexit that we can no longer send people back either to the first EU country that they landed in or to their home country. And I think that's what the problem is. Another problem is that since Brexit, Britain has failed to negotiate any bilateral returns deals with any other European countries.
For joining us this morning. Now, just quickly, because I know we've got to get to the news, good deal or bad deal yesterday?
I think it's a good start.
And a good start. We're all back on the path and the journey and all of this.
Good or bad?
Deal or bad?
I'm nervous because I don't think we should be relying on a foreign country to police our borders. And if it worked, Macron would then have enormous leverage and can put his little boot back on our throat. So that's why I support the small boats bill so strongly.
Every time we pay more money to France, we get more migrants coming over the channel. That's the bit.
Again, what do our viewers think of that as well? Well, that's it for the first hour of the show, but we'll be back very soon when we'll be revealing our last part of our exclusive interview with the Chancellor, and that's about the pandemic. He was the longest-serving Secretary of Health, and there was a pandemic plan in place, which they chucked out. So don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome back. This is Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. Coming up this hour, we'll be covering the last part of our exclusive interview with Jeremy Hunt.
And this is on the front page of every newspaper today. Gary Lineker's dispute with the BBC. We'll be discussing the fallout from that.
And of course, we want your views. You've been sending them in thick and fast, but keep them coming in. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, here's the news headlines with Ray.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 11. Let's get you up to date. The Chancellor has told GB News he wants Britain to have the most competitive business tax rates amid calls to scrap a planned hike in corporation tax. Ahead of Wednesday's spring budget, Jeremy Hunt spoke to Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation. He said the corporation tax increase from the 19 to 25% would still leave the UK with a lower rate than nearly all major rivals. But he said he was committed to previous promises of bringing down corporation tax.
What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
And the final part of that exclusive interview is coming up next. Now, Match of the Day will go ahead tonight, but without studio presenters or pundits, after Gary Lineker was forced by the broadcaster to step back from the show. Football commentators, including Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, say they won't appear in solidarity with their co-star after the BBC ruled that a Twitter post by Lineker was a breach of its guidelines. The former player had criticised the government's new asylum policy, likening the language used to that of 1930s Germany. In the last hour, Alex Scott has announced that she won't present tonight's programme of Football Focus, as it doesn't feel right, according to a statement. Akil Ahmed is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC. He told us it's complicated.
He has a number of employers, and so can the BBC really impose its particular perspective on social media policy on somebody who is a freelancer? If he was a full-time member of staff at the BBC, I think there would be a completely different conversation. This is not me dismissing it and saying it's a storm in a teacup. This is me saying it's complicated because of the nature of his contract and the fact that he's not actually a news and current affairs presenter.
Junior doctors say they have no choice but to strike on Monday after the Health Secretary failed to attend talks on Friday. It comes after Steve Barclay said he wanted them to call off a planned 3-day walkout and negotiate. Nearly 40,000 junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association voted to take industrial action. They're demanding a 35% pay rise and warn future strikes could last longer than 72 hours. NHS England says more than 100,000 patients have been treated in virtual wards over the last year. The patients stay in their own homes whilst receiving treatment and have their vital signs monitored remotely. Medical bosses say the scheme has been a real game changer, helping patients to avoid unnecessary hospital trips and enabling them to be discharged sooner. A 25-year-old man has been arrested under the Terrorism Act after the new IRA claimed responsibility for the shooting of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell. Now, it follows the search of a property in the Londonderry area. Police say the man will also be questioned over a hoax security alert. Earlier, a typed message was posted on a wall in Derry claiming responsibility for Mr. Caldwell's attempted murder. Mr. Caldwell remains critically ill in hospital after being shot several times at a sports complex in Omagh last month. Silicon Valley Bank UK says it will be put into insolvency from Sunday night. It comes after its parent company in America was put under US government control, becoming the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crisis. The Bank of England says it will stop SVB from making payments or accepting deposits. However, customers can be paid up to £85,000 from the deposit insurance scheme. And Tom Hanks has been named Worst Supporting Actor at the 2023 Razzie Awards. Now, a warning for those watching on TV, the following footage does contain flashing images. The Oscar-winning actor was chosen for his depiction of Colonel Tom Parker in the movie Elvis. His portrayal of Presley's former manager was described by judges as cruel, and they also slammed his so-called latex face. The awards honour poor performances in Hollywood movies and are held a day before the Oscars on Sunday. Everyone's a critic. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Ray. Joining us in the studio throughout the show is the broadcaster and journalist Michael Crick, as well as columnist Patrick O'Flynn. But before we go on to the next part of the Jeremy Hunt interview, we've just got a few views from our viewers.
Because from the last bit of the Jeremy Hunt interview, we're talking about HS2. Now, Martin says Osama to Tokyo is 500 kilometres, London to Birmingham's 150 kilometres, 20 minutes saving for £100 billion. Utter nonsense is what he says. But Oggy says, why shouldn't the UK have a modern railway? France, Japan, all of those do. Why don't we? In the sense of fairness there, both sides of the argument.
Alistair makes an interesting point. He says, if Mr Hunt wants to raise the level of corporation tax, then balance this off by creating zones that have a lower corporation tax levied. This could be part of the levelling up process to enrich the country north of the Watford Gap. I think he's got a
very
reasonable
good point.
Yeah. Now, in this next section, we start by asking Jeremy Hunt, who was the longest-serving Secretary of State for Health, after all, and who had put in place a pandemic plan, why was it abandoned? Just move on, finally, to about the pandemic. You were the longest-serving Secretary of State for Health. You were chairman of the Health Select Committee. You left a pandemic plan in place, which didn't involve a blanket lockdown. That wasn't what the plan was. Every other countries, Sweden had the same plan. They stuck to their plan. Why do you think the government abandoned the plan, the pandemic plan that you left behind? And you seem to also support the government in abandoning the plan that you left behind. So what was so wrong with your plan that it needed to be abandoned? It was, after all, your plan.
Well, I think we all have to be humble about the events of the pandemic, because I don't think we did as well as we could have done as a country. Although in other ways, our vaccine rollout, we were one of the very best in the world, so there's much to be proud of as well. But in terms of preparations, we did prepare exhaustively. Johns Hopkins University in the United States said we had the second best preparations of anywhere in the world. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, and it is with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that we over-focused on preparing for pandemic flu and not for the type of virus that we actually ended up with, which was a coronavirus.
Which is a flu virus.
It's not. It's a different type of virus, but it spreads slightly more slowly. So you have the incubation period, a longer incubation period, which is why, looking back on it, the approach that I advocated when I was chair of the Health Select Committee was really to follow what they were doing in Korea and Taiwan, where they avoided national lockdowns by having a much more effective test and trace system.
Do you accept that Sweden, which stuck to its pandemic plan and didn't lock down, did better than countries like New Zealand and China that went for a zero infection policy? Do you accept now that Sweden got it right and countries like New Zealand and China got it wrong?
I don't think it was quite so black and white as that, Phil. I think Sweden and the UK, we used the law, Sweden used a voluntary approach, but we had broadly fairly similar levels of compliance with the lockdowns. But in retrospect, I think there's a lot to learn from what Sweden did, but I don't think there was such a huge difference. I think the key thing is that we were the very best in the world when it came to getting a vaccine out of the blocks, getting the population vaccinated, getting back to normal. We did far better than Australia, New Zealand, China in that respect. But countries like Taiwan and countries like South Korea did better.
Are we going to see you on the Matt Hancock's WhatsApp leaks? Are we going to see correspondence between you and him? Because we've seen how he said he wanted to frighten the pants off people with the pandemic. Are you going to be revealed in any of those WhatsApp messages?
Well, I had WhatsApp exchanges with Matt because he was Health Secretary and I was Chair of the committee. I think they're all pretty boring. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but nothing quite as salacious as some of the things that we're reading.
Have you been shocked, though, by the things that you've read about him saying, that we want to frighten the pants off people? Are you shocked by that strategy, or do you think that was a good strategy that Matt Hancock was? Would you have done the same as Health Secretary? Would you have wanted to frighten the pants off people as a strategy? I'm not going to pile into Matt. I've learnt in this job that it in the end, it exposes every last flaw you have when you have a job at a high level in British politics.
That was a very kind answer there. Just one final question. Did you think, when you didn't win the leadership bid, that you would end up being asked to be Chancellor by the person who did win, and did you think you'd still remain there when Rishi became Prime Minister?
I didn't think so, not in my wildest dreams, and to the extent that when I got the text message from Liz Truss asking me to call her, I thought it was a hoax. So it's been a complete surprise to me. It's a total privilege because I set up and ran my own business for 14 years, and now I've got a chance to help other people who want to follow the same path that I did. But I'm also very aware of the challenges. I think I should also say I think it's an incredible privilege to be Rishi Sunak's Chancellor.
Did you think you'd stay there? Did you think you just couldn't have another change of Chancellor, or did you think he wanted you?
I think you'll have to ask him those questions, but what I'd say is that I think it's been a fantastic partnership. And
did you go to Liz Truss and say, Liz, it's time to stand down now as well? Were you one of those voices that went to her in a final question in her final days and hours? No, I wasn't. I wanted to be loyal to her. She'd appointed me to the job, and to her credit, she agreed to do all the things that I recommended we needed to do to restore stability. At that point, she didn't try and stop them, even though for her politically they were very embarrassing to do. I want to thank you for your time. I know it's an incredibly busy week. I now know you're racing off to Cabinet, so thank you for your time that you've given to us. Thank you, Esther. Thanks, Phil.
There we go. That was the final part. Patrick, what did you make about what he said about the pandemic? It still seems bizarre to me that he left behind a pandemic plan and seems perfectly relaxed about the government ripping it up and doing something completely different. Does that not strike you as being somewhat strange?
Yeah, I think it was a very good couple of years not to be on the front bench with ministerial responsibilities, because I think he's slightly reinventing things there, because I'm convinced I remember video footage of Jeremy almost sort of goggle-eyed with admiration for the ruthless way the Chinese were able to lock down, or I think it was China, it might have been another Southeast Asian country. And, you know, he seems to have backed away from that. He was admitting he went too heavily on the different characteristics of an influenza virus with slightly lower fatality rate, but a different rate of spreading. I thought it was quite interesting that he said boldly, I do not think we did as well as we could have done as a country. And that is almost the only hostage to fortune. He's a very skilled performer, Jeremy Hunt. That is a quote that could be used in an opposition party attack, should they wish to go on COVID. Although, ironically now, if you look down the list of issues the British public thinks the government's done broadly well on. COVID's actually at the top, and there's no thought that COVID is going to bring down the Conservatives.
He did say a lot of thought had gone into the pandemic plan. The strategy was 2011, it was revised in 2014, and then it was discarded, and they went against, because it was not to have lockdown, and they went against that. And by the way, all the plans of the 27 other European countries agreed with the European Centre for Disease Control. That also wasn't to be in lockdown, and that also got changed. And when he talked about similar with Sweden, actually, Sweden had better, as it were, mortality rates, and they didn't have all the collateral damage that we have got and the costs that we've got with the method that we pursued of that lockdown.
Well, I think we did, went too far on some of the things that happened during lockdown. But I mean, I just hope now that there are people in Whitehall and in the health department and in the other relevant departments who are going through both Hunt's plan and what happened and are coming up with a super-duper plan for all the different eventualities next time.
Yeah. Do you think there was a failure of the media at the time, Michael, that it seemed to be that the media at the time, the BBC and all these people at these conferences, all they ever said wasn't, why are you locking down? It was, why are you not locking down sooner? Why are you not locking down harder? Why are you not putting more restrictions in place? Do you think there was a failure of the media to actually put the other side of the argument to ministers?
Definitely. If I'd been a mainstream journalist still, I like to think that I would have been asking those kind of questions. Because certainly there were, there were lots of people in the general public and commentators elsewhere who were saying that things were going too far, it was too tough, it was illiberal. And it was one of those moments where we weren't, I don't think the media effectively did its duty in testing government policy as much as it should have done. But it's all very well for me to say that from the sideline. I wasn't there, and maybe I would have gone along with the herd as well. But
I don't think so. That's not you. That's why we've got you on here today. You certainly don't do that. Patrick, I just want to ask a question. He seemed surprised that he'd been made Chancellor, both by Liz Truss, and I think he was slightly speechless when I said, did you think you'd still be there with Rishi? He didn't really know what to say, but he was grateful.
Yes, and I think, with leadership campaigns, the sort of heavyweight figures who jump in early for a candidate, there is a tradition of being rewarded. I suspect that Rishi Sunak had somebody else in mind, but when he landed in Downing Street and there still was this market confidence issue and Hunt was seen to have calmed things reasonably well, he just thought it's not worth it. And there's a minister somewhere around the cabinet table, I think, who thought he was going to be Chancellor and maybe now thinks he'll be the next Chancellor.
Well, if we get some more of those WhatsApp leaks, we might find out who that was.
It was. I mean, I thought it was a shock that Liz Truss asked Jeremy Hunt to be the new. Was it? I mean,
but she sort of had to. She had to make a radical departure, didn't she? And as Hunt is broadly on the left and stood for the opposite of what she and Kwarteng had done, then that was a way of doing it. And keeping Hunt was a way of maintaining the continuity after how many chances? Was it 4 chances last year?
I think 4 months. I think we had 4.
Yeah. And the guy, you give him a task, he can absolutely deliver. He was seen as an adult in the cabinet. He has got lots of credible sort of background, and his business background. I mean, there were many reasons
and
to
been a
choose him,
minister
although she
for
never
goodness
would.
knows how many years.
Yeah. Anyway, you're staying with us.
Right.
We've done that exclusive interview, but there's still more coming up. We're going to be talking about Gary Lineker and that fallout this week. Did the BBC overreact? What was their policy? We're talking about lockdown policies and pandemic policies. What was the BBC's impartiality policy, and how did they back it up? They didn't know, and we've got the fallout now. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello and welcome back. It's 11:22. Just waiting for it to get to 11:22 there. Now, it's been reported on the front pages of every newspaper Gary Lineker has been stood down from presenting Match of the Day after his criticism of the government's new illegal migration bill. I'm looking here, The Guardian, Lineker suspended over row, Telegraph, BBC faces revolt over Lineker, BBC stars walk out over solidarity with Lineker.
And Match of the Day pundits and commentators have also now refused to work, standing in solidarity with him. So have the BBC overreacted, or were they justified in ensuring that he abided by the rules on impartiality? Now, Michael, I know you feel very strongly about impartiality in the broadcasting world. I think you still want GB News to be closed down because you don't think it's impartial.
Well, there's more and more Conservative MPs presenting GB News than ever at the moment, aren't there? You and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lee Anderson now.
We give the Chancellor a hard time, though, don't we?
No, but there's an element, a bit like newspapers, isn't it? You know what they are.
Yes.
There's a complete transparency there. You can sort of judge your views either way. But equally, we have to make sure that we ask the questions that equally, as you could say, put Jeremy Hunt on the spot. We ask them from the right rather than always from the left, as the BBC does.
Isn't the problem, Michael, is that nobody doubts what mine and Esther's starting point are. We don't hide our starting point, whereas the BBC masquerades as being impartial, but then actually doesn't actually do. That's much more sinister, isn't it?
I will admit that there have been times in recent years when the BBC and indeed other mainstream channels have not been entirely impartial, and there have been certain reporters and presenters, and you think, well, I know what you think on Brexit.
It's all right, we know before we go in for the interview.
And that was wrong. And the thing is, Tim Davie came in and was determined to crack down on this. And I think he's done so to some extent, and certain key people, I better not mention them, have actually left the BBC and gone and done other things. I think this decision was the right one because Lineker is a flagship face of the BBC. He's paid more than any other BBC person. And the fact that he's freelance rather than staff is only a very minor point. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the BBC allowed Alan Sugar, and has allowed Alan Sugar over the years, to get away with his views, which are, broadly pro-Conservative government. And he told people to vote Conservative in the 2019 election. And he presents, of course, what the name of the Apprentice. The Apprentice. And indeed, there are other... And you've got the terrible situation of Richard Sharp as well, now embroiled in this whole issue of the loan to Boris Johnson. And frankly, he should stand down. But the only people who are going to make him stand down are the government, so that's not going to happen. So it's a right mess. But I do think, broadly, this is the right decision, because I think it would be very difficult if Lineker is allowed to carry on making his tweets, which he's made it clear he wants to. It would be very difficult for the BBC to discipline people at lower levels for doing the same thing.
Patrick, I think the way the BBC's handled this has been quite clumsy, very poor. Gary's been tweeting inappropriately, as it were, from 2016 on various issues. But surely they should have had a process in place. This is what you do. This is how we tell you off. The first time you might get away with it, we'll give you a warning. And after that, this is what happens. It seems it hasn't, and it's all collided. They didn't know what they were going to do, and last minute they take him off. So I think the BBC has handled it very badly.
Well, I think, to be fair, Tim Davie has come in and he has tried to put new, tougher rules in place. He certainly warned a lot of the staff to curtail their social media. It's not true that only apply to people in politics and current affairs coverage. There was a special clause for people with very high profiles too. And Gary Lineker not only has repeatedly crossed the line, but he indicated this week he was going to carry on crossing the line.
Was it his arrogance as well?
Well, I think, in effect, he was humiliating the Director General. And to be fair, I thought Tim Davie was just going to let sand get kicked in his face, but obviously got fed up with that. Now, I don't know if the BBC Sports Department, which has effectively gone on strike, understands this, but I think, de facto, what they're campaigning for today is the end of the licence fee, because you cannot have a compulsory licence fee in a politically polarised age and then allow people who are high profile, benefiting from a lot of largesse from that compulsory fee, then wading in with high octane political comments that actually insult more than half the public. And the early polling on, for instance, the illegal migration bill showed 52% support, 36% opposition. Now, Lineker, if I just finish this, Lineker didn't just say, I don't agree with this and think we should be more generous. He actually cast doubt on the good faith of the people putting forward the measures, branded them extreme. He used phrases immeasurably cruel, beyond awful, and then the Nazi comparison. That's just not viable. There's no way you can make people who think it's a good measure, as I do, think, I'm paying this guy...
Pivotal moment for the BBC.
Huge amounts of money.
I mean, it does seem to be that any comparison to the sort of Nazi Germany and the 1930s, I mean, Andrew Bridgen lost the Tory whip, really, over that kind of comparison. I just wonder, Michael, how are the BBC going to get out of this situation? Because we've got the Match of the Day pundits on strike, the commentators on strike, I don't know what the production staff are going to do the same. Now, it seems to me, either the BBC's going to have to back down or Gary Lineker's going to have to back down, or we could have the end of Match of the Day. How do they get out of this situation now?
I do not know. I mean, Gary Lineker is not going to back down. It's possible that he would come to an agreement with Davie. OK, I won't do any more tweeting. I'll put it in writing. But the BBC would have to say that he'd agreed. That would mean huge loss of face for him. And he is really committed to what he's saying on this issue. And I agree with some of what he's saying on this issue. I just don't think he should be saying it. And the same with Davie. I mean, you could end up with a situation where they both go.
Well,
which has happened in the past.
So massive fallout in that regard. Maybe many people go. But how about what Patrick said? This is the start of maybe the whole change of the BBC, the start of when the licence fee stops?
Well, the licence fees days are numbered anyway, or years are numbered anyway. I think most people admit that, but it could happen sooner than the BBC would want. And this is, I mean, the trouble with this particular issue is, I mean, it's not like, say, David Attenborough on climate change, because there is broadly a consensus on climate change right now. Not the speed with which we do it, but most of it. On this is, possibly the biggest issue, or certainly one of the biggest issues in the run-up to the next election. And that's why it's so important. And I do think Patrick's right in terms of the problem is that if they carry on down this line, then the next time a Conservative government has to consider these issues of the Charter and the licence fee, they're going to be a lot more unfriendly in the same way that they were unfriendly towards Channel 4 over the ice block instead of Boris Johnson.
Just quickly, you're a big football fan. Why do they pay Gary Lineker £1.35 million a year to host Match of the Day? I mean, Mark Chapman, who does the Sunday version, he gets $250,000 a year, and he does rugby league as well, and all the rest. Why? I mean, I just don't understand why he's worth all this money. Am I missing something?
Well, he is an extremely good. Well, so is Mark, but I'd say Lineker's slightly better.
Slightly, 7 times better.
Well, presumably they have polling which shows that he attracts a lot more viewers. I don't know.
Most people don't know the answer why, so I'll leave it there. None
but
of
I mean,
us does.
Presumably GB News does polling on you.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my 1.35 million fee sign up. But anyway, look, stay with us. But for one thing, for all of those fans that feel that they missed out on Match of the Day, then you can join us here live 10 p.m. for a special GB News Sports Roundup with Mark Dolan. 10 o'clock tonight, you've got to do that. But still to come, Saturday morning with Esther and Phil, we'll be speaking to GB News viewers and listeners on what they've had to say on our big interview and what they want in the budget next week. Stay with us.
(11). I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The Chancellor has told GB News that he wants Britain to have the most competitive business tax rates amid calls to scrap a planned hike in corporation tax. Ahead of Wednesday's spring budget, Jeremy Hunt spoke to Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis on his plans to deliver growth and tackle inflation. He said the corporation tax increase from 19% to 25% would still leave the UK with a lower rate than nearly all major rivals. But he said he was committed to previous promises of bringing down corporation tax. The BBC is experiencing a mass boycott by its sports presenters after Gary Lineker was forced to step back from the show. Match of the Day will go ahead tonight, but presenters and pundits, including Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, have backed out. Within the last hour, Alex Scott has said she won't present tonight's edition of Football Focus, and Jason Mohammed won't appear on Final Score. It comes after the broadcaster ruled that a tweet by Lineker criticising the government's new asylum policy was in breach of its guidelines. A 25-year-old man has been arrested under the Terrorism Act after the new IRA claimed responsibility for the shooting of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell. It follows the search of a property in the Londonderry area. Police say the man will also be questioned over a hoax security alert. Earlier, a typed message was posted on a wall in Derry claiming responsibility for Mr. Caldwell's attempted murder. Mr. Caldwell remains critically ill in hospital after being shot several times at a sports complex in Omagh last month. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back to Esther and Phil in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:35. Where has that morning gone? We're always keen to hear from our GB viewers, and we're joined today by 2 business owners who may have a thing or two to say following the Chancellor's interview with us. So joining us now is Rob Baker and Mike Flynn. So let's start with you, Rob. As a tech entrepreneur, what did you think about Jeremy Hunt's interview, and what would you like to see in the budget?
Well, good morning, everyone. I think as I listened to Jeremy Hunt, the thing that was rattling around in my head primarily was the old Bill Clinton line. It's the economy, stupid. We're 18 months coming up to an election, and things haven't changed. That's really what it's about. My feeling is that there was I was disappointed a little bit with what Jeremy had to say, because he seemed to say a lot of the right things, but then the movement is to do the opposite. And corporation tax is my big thing about what needs to be impacted here, and it needs to be reduced. He used to speak like we want the lowest effective corporation tax compared to our competitors. But to me, that doesn't ring true. It just sounds like it's the absolute measure that really counts most in terms of improving what we need to improve to make an impact to the economy. The other thing I really wanted to talk about a little bit about is I'm interested in innovation. And when we think about this country, Great Britain, my take on what the great in Great Britain is our history of innovating things. We have brilliant, genius people that are able to create and lead the world in many products. And I'm thinking a little bit of this mobile phone. We all have one of these in our pocket. Now, I'm not sure if people know, but right at the heart of this is a genius piece of British technology that everyone in the world almost carries around in their pocket. And that is the ARM microprocessor. It was developed in Cambridge, and we need to equip the next generation of innovation to do those types of things. And we're not going to do that by setting people up to run a 100-meter race, putting a heavy jacket full of bricks on their back, and expecting them to be able to perform in world-class times. So for me, corporation tax, and I know you really hit him hard on this, Esther, and I'm with you on this. He's going to increase it. That's a great shame. We need to reduce it. We need to bring it back to...
Rob, you and I are on the same wavelength, and we were pushing that. Thank you. You've come out with some great points, and overly cautious, Phil, maybe.
Yeah, Mike, let's bring you in. You're the director of a railway engineering company. What did you make particularly of what he said about HS2 and the delays to HS2? Are you a pro or anti-HS2 man?
I'm a little bit of a heretic in the industry, in that I've always been opposed to HS2. I've never felt it was a very good idea. The history of HS2, it was originally a lobbying effort by the railway industry, and particularly by an organisation that was set up called Green Gauge 21, who lobbied very heavily for it. And it was really driven by the idea that they had high-speed rail, very high-speed rail on the continent, and we should have some here. And that was the scope of the argument. And then Andrew Donald eventually got it through the Labour cabinet, saying it was going to be cost 28 billion and now it's 77 billion. It's going to be 100 billion. The justification moved from the time savings when that business case didn't stack up to the capacity issue.
Rob, Mike, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We always like to get in a clip of our GB News viewers to see what they have to say. We like reading out the views, but we like hearing from you direct as well. So.
Interesting hearing Mike's views there, you know, that it was great everywhere else, let's have it here. Hadn't really thought it through, and as you say, now the business case isn't for it and the costs keep escalating. Really good to hear his view.
And I thought Rob made a good point as well, and he said that Jeremy Hunt was saying, yes, we want low taxes, we want growth. The words were good, but the actions are going in the opposite direction.
I put it as overly cautious, but was it that? There was a resistance there, wasn't it? Saying the right things, but a resistance.
Always common sense from our viewers.
That's why they're on the show now, not just reading their emails out. We get them on.
Now, it's the best week of the year next week. It's the start of the Cheltenham Festival on Tuesday, the biggest week in horse racing. But the lead-up has been somewhat overshadowed by controversial new rules over the whip. Joining us now is the award-winning racing TV presenter, Nick Luck. Nick, I think you're at Sandown Races. It looks very sunny there. But look, Cheltenham next week, it's my favourite week of the year. What can people expect? People tuning in, what can they expect?
Phil, I'm really sorry. I just lost the last part of your question there.
I was wanting you to whet our appetite for next week's Cheltenham Festival and what you're most looking forward to for next week.
Well, it's 28 fantastic races over 4 days. If the weather's like this, we will be blessed. I'm not sure the forecast is going to be quite so kind to us. And I think if you ask anybody who's even remotely close to the sport, they'll give you one horse's name, and that's Constitution Hill. We're all expecting him to win the Champion Hurdle on Tuesday, but it's more than that. I think all of us feel that, a bit like if you were in the 60s and saw Arkle, if you were in the late 80s and saw Desert Orchid, if you were in the late noughties, early 10s and saw Corto Star, you're seeing a horse of a generation and might be the best hurdler, a horse to race over the smaller jumps and obstacles that many of us have ever seen. So one name, Constitution Hill Tuesday, that's what I'm looking forward to most. So it could be an I was there moment.
The build-up's been slightly overshadowed by the use of the whip, with jockeys getting banned. New rules have been introduced. You were part of the team that looked at those rules, and the Jockey Club airbrushed the whip out of the winning rider from last year's Cheltenham Gold Cup as if they were somehow embarrassed by it. Is racing embarrassed about people using the whip in racing? And if so, should they stop?
Well, racing shouldn't be embarrassed by the use of what's known as the whip, but in reality is a foam-covered implement that barely registers in terms of causing any serious impact on an animal. It's technologically moved on so far in the last few years, and I think that was really part of the debate over 18 months that the Whip Review Steering Committee engaged in, which was the ethical debate of, are we still happy that this foam-covered implement is still used as a tool for encouragement to try and make the sport as competitive as possible and to try and get the maximum effort possible. And after a lot of well-considered debate, I think the feeling was that yes, we were ethically comfortable with this. And then the question is, right, within that framework, you want to see it used responsibly and well, and in a manner that is palatable and perhaps more streamlined and elegant than had been the case sometimes in the past. And you want those rules then, most importantly, to be abided by. And you want any regulator wants their rules to be adhered to. And so they were the important. Once you'd effectively solve the ethical argument, right? Yes, we are happy for this to be used for encouragement. Then it's a question of, right, how is this best regulated? So 18 months of painstaking work. What happened between the end of that 18-month process and the actual execution of the rules was a pretty indistinct, opaque period where the jockeys and the board of the British Horse Racing Authority sort of thrashed things out in a rather inelegant way, if you'll pardon the unfortunate pun there, and they've come to a situation situation whereby these rules have come in just before the Cheltenham Festival, so the shop window of the sport. So it's not exactly an ideal situation from a communications point of view. But to answer your original question, should we be happy as a sport that this is an essential and vital part of a jockey's equipment to make the sport both safe and competitive? Then I would say the answer should be yes.
We've actually got a whip here in the studio with us, and to see that it's cushioned and all the rest of it. But look, just finally, Nick, you're the expert. Don't say Constitution Hill because that's too obvious. Can you give our viewers one horse to back for next week's Cheltenham Festival?
Well, I'll give you a couple, Phil, if I can. Again, this isn't massively original. I think Edwardstone will win the big Queen Mother Champion Chase on Wednesday. I think Flooring Porter will defend his crown in the Stayers Hurdle on Thursday, and on Friday, Ahoy Senor for the Gold Cup I think is still a little bit of value. He's a massively talented horse. He's not the best or most fluent jumper in the world, but if he gets it all together, I still think he's got that little bit of brilliance that can separate the good horse from the elite level animal. So fingers crossed for Ahoy Senor on Friday in the Gold Cup.
Thank you for that. We'll play that clip at the end of next week. And I think Nick's just been blown away. But thank you very much, Nick Luck, for joining us this morning. Now, just to discuss further the issue of the whip, we're joined now by horse consultant for Animal Aid, Dean Stansell. So, Dean, I don't know if you heard what Nick Luck had to say there. We've got a jockey's whip here. It's called a Pro Cush. It's cushioned. He says that it doesn't actually hurt horses, and so
He's got his own.
My word.
But you know what this is? It's a duel. It's a whip duel.
We've got a collection. So, I mean, do you accept that the new jockey's whip doesn't actually hurt horses in the way that maybe a previous one did?
No, it's still a very cruel implement. The idea that you actually hit an animal in public, is distasteful for the vast majority of British people, and they would like to see the whip banned. But Nick painted a rosy picture that this is a cushioned implement, but the cushion bit is a very small part of a whip. And not just the cushioned area it's the horse, but the rod hits the horse and the handle as well. And horses often get hit over the face. Horses have a bit in the mouth. We use these on horses, and we use the whip as well. And these are riding tools because of jockeys' inefficiencies to ride horses properly in the modern world. And we're starting to hit horses that the public find repulsive. It's time that the whip was banned. And why should it be banned? Because jockeys don't stick to the rules. Last year, in 2022, 429 whip offences were committed where jockeys went over and above the amount of times that the racing industry said that they could strike horses. So despite having rules, those rules are still broken.
Can I ask a question? Because obviously, we were trying it out. That doesn't sound very good. I was trying it out last night to see how it was, and it didn't hurt. It was about the noise, and it was, I guess, to get the horse alert. But I guess my question to you is, do you want to stop horse racing altogether, or is it just the whip you want to stop?
I would like to see the way horses are treated at the moment. We've got over 200 horses dying on British racecourses. At Cheltenham, since 2001, there's been 59 horses killed at Cheltenham racing. So this isn't a great, glorious sport. It's actually animal abuse. So
what I wanted to ask, is this you trying to stop horse racing altogether? Is this the start of stopping horse racing altogether? Just a yes or no?
Yes, it is. And without a doubt, because of the poor treatment, we filmed horses that have run at Cheltenham that have gone into slaughterhouses and been slaughtered just months after their last race. That is the treatment that the racing industry is giving horses. No respect, slaughtering them after they're no longer any use. I've got 2 ex-race horses myself, one ridden by Frankie Dettori. who had nowhere to
Dean,
go
it's
at the end
not
of their
about the
racing
whip.
league.
That's all we were saying. It's not about the whip. It is stopping horse racing altogether. So we'll have to sort of end it there. And from what I know of the industry, horse racers are treated incredibly well in their lifetime. And as you say, they do have a life after racing, and you've got a couple of horses there. But this is a debate we'll come back to again. Dean, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And I guess that's the issue. People who are animal lovers talk about now whether you're going to carry on racing or not.
Well, they are pampered creatures, to be perfectly honest. Now, you just disclosed that you were using the whip last night, which for people, Aidan was horrified. I was wondering, Hayley, the racing industry say this doesn't hurt. Right. I don't know if you want to give Aidan a crack with it to see if he can vouch for the fact. Will you give Aidan a crack with it?
Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Oh, when you do it. Just a...
Oh, that's a bit painful.
Oh, yeah. It's a ton horse, half a ton horse.
I've got sensitive skin.
Well,
it's all that cream you put on. It's all that cream you put on. Anyway, look.
Let's hit him a bit harder than that.
No, maybe later.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Aidan McGee's with us, and of course, Hayley Palmer's with us to give us latest showbiz, not whipping news, but showbiz news, the Oscars.
Yes, really excited. It's Hollywood's biggest night of the year tomorrow, and I'm buzzing for it. In fact, I want to know what happens this year, because I remember sat here last year being like, is there going to be an excitement? Of course, it was the whole Will Smith thing. This year, they've actually got a crisis team on standby, just in case anything does happen. Now, this year, it's Jimmy Kimmel hosting for the third time, so I'm sure he will kind of make some reference to it. But I'd love to flag up a new talent called Leslie Patterson. She's got a film called All Quiet on the Western Front. And what I love about her story is that she read the book at school and she's been rooting to make this a film for 14 years. She moved to Hollywood with 2 suitcases, no money, no contacts, worked as a waitress at the Academy Awards. And this year, she's up for 9 awards. And I just think that is such an inspirational story. And I love to see new talent coming through, because obviously we've got all your icons, but it is good that there's new talent coming through this year, which I've noticed that there is.
I actually thought her life story should also be made into a film. I mean, she was an athlete, and she used, I think, that skill and discipline. And we watched the film.
We watched it about last week.
Deeply moving, actually. It took me days to recover from it. It was honestly deeply moving.
Hayley, do you think the Oscars needs controversy, though? Do you think it needs it to make it more interesting?
Yeah, definitely, because everyone's going to tune in this year. Because I think the viewing figures went down, but because of what happened last year, everyone's like, oh my God, we need to tune in this year. So bring it on. I want to flag up also the film that's definitely going to sweep the board with everything, which is Everything Everywhere All at Once. This film is unstoppable. This is like the darling of the Oscars. That's the one that's going to scoop everything up. So if you're going to put a bet on, put it on that film. That's what I say.
What about Scream 6?
But what about Elvis?
There's
lots of other ones. I'd sooner.
Aidan's mentioning Scream. But from what I can tell, Aidan and Hayley had a hot date.
No, it wasn't a hot date.
Yes,
it was.
You mean, have we brought them together? An on-screen relationship?
No, just to confirm.
It was a very cosy picture.
It was very professional, and Aidan had his lucky chance to actually go to a premiere for the first time.
Here they are, looking gorgeous together, if you don't mind me saying.
It's a good photo of me.
I have to say...
I borrowed some of Hayley's makeup.
Aidan, I was going to say that. You look like you're very tanned. You look like you've been on a sunbed or something.
Bromley's quite warm at the moment.
What a nice couple.
Do you know what? This whip will come in handy to find out whether he is having a relationship with Hayley later. We'll get that truth out of him.
Anyway, back to the Oscars, as I was saying. We hope Boston Butler win. I also want to point out that the goodie bags this year, I've got to read, the goodie bags are £126,000. They're worth that much money.
Each one?
Yes.
Not all of them together.
Not all of them together.
How do you get an invite?
That free?
I know, we need to be there.
Giving that free?
So they must have their own security for those goodie bags and what's in them. They've got, because they've had things like watches in the past and I don't know, other jewellery.
Dying to know what's inside there. Also, we want to look out for Rihanna, who's going to be performing as well. And best dress, I'm going to go for Kate Blanchett, because I always think she looks so elegant. And Austin Butler, of course.
Yes.
So that's who we're looking out for tonight.
So we won't know what's going to happen in the Premier League today, because none of us can watch match. We'll be able to watch match of the day at this rate.
No, what I'm worried about, I mean, final score's
Put your name forward, put your name forward.
Listen, people have been saying that, but I'm very happy at GBNews.
They can't afford me. He gets paid more than Gary Lineker.
No, not quite. I'm about a tenner behind him. No, the final score's gone now, and the PFA have now decided that none of their players are going to make themselves available for interview.
None of them, or just some aren't?
No, it's just none. I mean, every player's a member of the PFA, so they've been advised not to. So I think they must have gone to the PFA and said, what should we do?
I want to
Because
ask you a question. Do you think they've ever really liked giving those interviews? Because I always think they get them at a bad time. They don't look comfortable, and they're thinking, "Great, this is a great excuse. We now don't have to do those interviews."
They don't. I mean, like, the oldest trick used to be coming through the mix zone, which is the equivalent of the red carpet at the Oscars or a premiere, which I'll be going to more of, I think.
I don't think so.
With
And they have their headphones on when they don't want to speak to you.
Yes.
But if you're charming as a reporter and you say, come over here, come over here, you can get some out of them.
Those interviews at the end of the match of the day with the players, and it's ridiculous, isn't it? The teams wanting to. Are you happy that you've won?
Yes, but sometimes there is a degree.
Oh no, I'm absolutely gutted that we.
Believe it or not,
did you see it went straight for that whip? It didn't even need to. Then did you see that?
There's a microphone.
With
a microphone, aren't they?
Some of the microphones are like that. The long
Yeah,
ones,
exactly.
No, there is a degree of control from the big broadcasters over what you can ask them. That's preordained at the start of the season. Believe it or not.
So let's thank God we're not going to have those boring interviews. That's
but sometimes the managers and players just use them to say what they want to say. So they're not always uninteresting. Although some players have complained about the timing. They say, well, I've just come off the pitch 5 minutes ago. I'm angry and I'm emotional and I shouldn't be subjected to this. But yeah, it's a good excuse not to do them.
Oh, Hayley.
Pat Sharp, I wanted to ask you about Pat Sharp.
Yes,
he needs a job, doesn't he? Match of the day could be beckoning for him.
Yeah, he's been cancelled for saying an inappropriate comment. He was at a gig, there's about 400 people there, and he said something he shouldn't have said. I have interviewed Pat Sharp. I think he's a really nice guy, personally, and maybe, I don't know if he'd had a drink or something and said something he shouldn't have, got carried away. I don't know what happened, but he has been cancelled from his radio job.
But nobody's going on strike for him, are they?
No, they're not. I mean, he's a legend. He's been in the business a long time, but you've got to be careful what you say in public, haven't you? Especially when you've got 400 people in the room.
Well, it seems to be different rules for different people, that's all I think. Everyone's going on strike to support Gary Lineker. Pat Sharp, nobody's even noticed he's lost.
Would they go on strike for us, Phil?
No.
I would. Yeah, but some would say I'm on strike anyway.
Aidan McGee, thank you very much indeed. Hayley Palmer, thank you very much indeed. What a day it's been. What a show it's been. Our exclusive interview there with Jeremy Hunt and all your views coming in, what you thought. So that's it from us today. Next is Alistair Stewart and friends. But you know what? We'll be back next week. Can't wait. 10 o'clock next week.
We're off to give everyone a good whipping now. That's what we're going to do.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We'll see cloud and rain moving north and east across the UK through the course of Saturday into Sunday. There will be some hill snow. It will turn quite breezy as well. So looking at the bigger picture, and we can see cold air across the UK is being moved out the way now as Atlantic air returns.